In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the European sky, a lone bomber flies a corridor of death. Its mission, to cripple the German war machine. Its reality, a 10-hour gauntlet of flak and fighters. For the crews of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, every mission was a calculated gamble with fate. But on one particular day, for one particular crew, the odds would narrow to a razor's edge. What happens when a fortress finds itself truly alone? When the sky itself seems to turn against it? This is not just a story of survival, but of a single broken instrument of war, and the man who wielded it against impossible odds. This is the story of when 15 German fighters swarmed a lone B-17, and how one broken gun turned the tide. Our story takes us to the bitter winter of 1944. The date, February 24th. The location, the hostile skies over Schweinfurt, Germany, a name that already carried a heavy, bloody legacy for the 8th Air Force. The target, the ball-bearing plants vital to the Nazi war effort. Among the vast armada of bombers droning towards the heart of the Reich was Wee Willie, a B-17G of the 322nd Bomb Squadron, 91st Bomb Group, based at RAF Bassingbourn. At the controls was pilot First Lieutenant Robert Bob Campbell. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant John Jack Vincent. A crew of 10 men, bound by trust and the cold metallic reality of their aircraft. The strategic situation was clear. The Allies needed to strangle German production. But the Luftwaffe, though battered, was far from defeated. Their fighters had evolved. No longer just the nimble Messerschmitt Bf 109s, but the heavier, deadlier Focke-Wulf FW-190s, armed with cannons capable of shredding a bomber's airframe. The German tactic was brutal and effective. Break the bomber formations, isolate the stragglers, and destroy them. Wee Willie and her crew were veterans. They had seen the flak gardens over Berlin, felt the jarring impact of near misses. But on this mission, fate would deal them a crippling blow long before they reached the target. Over Belgium, a malfunctioning supercharger on their No. 4 engine began to bleed precious power. The bomber slowed, its airspeed bleeding away. The immense, protective shield of the combat box formation, a lattice of interlocking defensive fire, began to recede into the distance. The fortress was becoming a fortress in name only, lagging, vulnerable, a solitary whale waiting for the wolves to descend. Lieutenant Campbell fought the controls, but the laws of physics were merciless. Wee Willie fell behind, and in the clear, cold air they were seen. His first warning was not a sight, but a sound. The high-pitched, frantic voice of the ball turret gunner, Sergeant James Jiggs Donahue, crackled over the interphone. Fighters! 9 o'clock level! A whole damned gaggle of 'em. Craning their necks, the crew saw them. Not just one or two, but a swarm. The sunlight glinted off the distinctive, angular wings of Focke-Wulf FW-190s. They were from Jägerschwader 26, the Abbeville boys, some of the most experienced and deadly fighter pilots in the Luftwaffe. They circled at a distance, assessing, patient. They counted one wounded bomber, separated from the herd. This was not an engagement. It was a predestined execution. Aboard Wee Willie, a cold dread, colder than the -50-degree air outside, settled over the crew. Each man checked his oxygen, his electrical heating suit, and most importantly, his guns. In the tail, hunched in his cramped, isolated position, was 20-year-old Staff Sergeant Archibald Archie Matthews. His domain was the twin .50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns of the tail turret, the bomber's rearguard, its most vulnerable and most critical defensive position. At 1,345 hours, the dance of death began. The FW-190s, following standard Gruppen tactics, split into elements. 2 rotten pairs climbed for a high-side attack from the front, aiming for the cockpit and engines. Another pair positioned for a low frontal attack, the most difficult to defend against. The rest, the majority, lingered behind and to the flanks, waiting for the crippling blows to land. Their first pass was a scythe. Cannon shells, 20 millimeters in diameter, ripped through the left wing. The No. 2 engine coughed a plume of black smoke and seized. Now Wee Willie was running on 2 engines on the same wing. The aircraft yawed violently. Chaotic, wounded cockpit scene in the radio room. Shrapnel tore through the equipment, wounding the radio man. A shell exploded in the cockpit, wounding co-pilot Vincent and sending a shard of plexiglass into pilot Campbell's shoulder. The air was filled with the scream of tearing metal, the acrid smell of cordite, and the piercing rush of sub-zero air through new holes. The gunners fought back. The chatter of .50 caliber guns from the top turret, the waist, the chin, filled the air. Tracers laced towards the sleek German fighters. One FW-190, caught in a crossfire from the waist gunners, shuddered, then spiraled away with a trail of smoke. But it was a single drop in a coming storm. The German fighters pressed their advantage. For 20 minutes, they came in relentless, disciplined waves. By 1410 hours, Wee Willie was a flying wreck. The oxygen system was shot out, forcing the crew onto portable bottles. Hydraulic fluid bled into the slipstream, meaning the landing gear and flaps were likely useless. The controls were heavy, sluggish. And then, the worst sound a gunner can hear, silence from a critical position. The dorsal top turret gun had jammed. Then the right waist gunner's weapon took a direct hit and was destroyed. Their defensive fire was being systematically amputated. In the tail, Archie Matthews was a man living in a hurricane of noise and violence. His twin Brownings had been firing almost continuously. Then, during a steep, evasive maneuver by Campbell, a cannon shell slammed into the turret's housing just below the guns. The impact was deafening. When the smoke cleared, Matthews assessed the damage. One of his .50 calibers, the left one, was completely destroyed, a mangled piece of scrap. The right gun was worse. It was bent, its charging mechanism jammed, its barrel warped. By all technical standards, it was useless, a broken tool. He reported the damage over the interphone, his voice thin with strain. Tail to pilot. Both guns out. I say again, tail guns inoperative. The words were a death sentence. For the German pilots, the tail of the bomber was now a blind spot, an open door. They regrouped. Of the original 15, one was down, but others had likely joined the hunt. They formed a line, a deadly conveyor belt of fire. They would now make sequential attacks from the rear, the classic Vernichtung, annihilation maneuver. Without tail guns, the B-17 had no defense. Each pass would slaughter the crew from back to front. Inside the bomber, the reality sank in. Fear, sharp and metallic, gripped the men. They were out of options, out of altitude, and nearly out of hope. They were locked in a 300-mile-per-hour coffin, waiting for the nails to be driven in. Pilot Campbell, bleeding and fighting the dying controls, gave the order no commander ever wants to give. He told the crew to prepare to bail out. Over occupied territory with several wounded, it was a grim prospect. But it was the only one left. In the shattered tail turret, Archie Matthews heard the order. He looked at his broken gun. He looked at the line of FW-190s forming up behind him, their pilots no doubt confident, lining up for the kill shot. The distance closed. 800 yards. 600 yards. The lead fighter would soon be in optimal range. Matthews made a decision. He would not abandon his post. Not yet. With hands numb from cold and raw from handling hot steel, he attacked the broken right gun. He had no tools but his own strength and a desperate will. He braced his feet against the turret wall. He gripped the cocking handle of the inoperable machine gun. The mechanism was jammed solid, bent by the force of the blast. He pulled. Nothing. He pulled again, a grunt of effort swallowed by the wind roar. He pulled with every ounce of strength in his 140-pound frame, a strength born not of muscle, but of sheer, defiant refusal to accept the inevitable. And then it moved. The bent handle slid back a fraction. He pulled again. Another fraction. Millimeter by millimeter, he manually forced the warp charging mechanism through its cycle. It was a task designed for a hydraulic system or a strong man using both hands under normal conditions. He was doing it with one damaged gun, in a battered turret under G-forces with enemy fighters lining up to kill him. Finally, with a sound that was the most beautiful he had ever heard, the bolt slammed home. A single .50 caliber round was chambered. But the gun was still bent. The barrel was misaligned. Firing it could cause it to explode in his face. The electrical firing solenoid was dead. There was no sight. He would have to aim the entire aircraft, his entire turret, by maneuvering his body. And he had one shot. One shot before the mechanism would likely jam again, irrevocably. The lead FW-190 was steady in its approach. For 100 yards. The perfect killing distance. Matthews did not have tracers. He would have to guess. He took a breath of freezing, thin air. He wrapped his hand around the manual trigger grip. He manually elevated the battered barrel, judging the drop, the lead, the vibration of the dying aircraft. He was no longer a gunner. He was an artisan, and his tool was broken. His canvas was the sky, and his brush was a single bullet. At 300 yards, the German pilot likely fingered his cannon trigger. He saw no defensive fire. The tail was silent, scarred, and still. It was, for all intents and purposes, a dead target. He settled his Pipper on the wounded Fortress's fuselage. Matthews fired. At 300 yards, the German pilot likely fingered his cannon trigger. He saw no defensive fire. The tail was silent, scarred, and still. It was, for all intents and purposes, a dead target. He settled his Pipper on the wounded Fortress's fuselage. Matthews fired. The gun did not explode. The single round, propelled by a prayer and brute force, streaked across the diminishing space. And by a miracle of chance or skill or destiny, it found its mark. It struck the FW-190's cockpit canopy. The plexiglass shattered. The round or the fragments tore into the pilot. The sleek fighter, a moment ago the embodiment of lethal purpose, suddenly veered off its attack line. It nosed down, then rolled onto its back and began a slow, final descent towards the earth below. On the German fighter frequency, confusion erupted. They had seen no torrent of tracer fire, no sustained defense. Only a single, almost pathetic, puff of smoke from the tail. And yet, their flight leader was going down. Had he been hit by a stray shot from another bomber? Had his own engine failed? The psychology of the attack shifted instantly. The clean, clinical execution was now tainted with uncertainty and risk. On the fifth of these monumental single shots, another miracle. His aimed round punctured the engine cowling of a second FW-190. Glycol streamed behind it like white blood. The fighter broke off, trailing smoke, and fell out of the formation. Two planes had now fallen to this seemingly inert tail. The German pilots were now faced with an irrational, frightening scenario. A mortally wounded bomber that somehow kept killing from its corpse. The coordinated, sequential attacks dissolved. The fighters began making less disciplined, more cautious passes, which were more easily disrupted by the B-17's remaining, functional side guns. For over 40 minutes, this surreal duel continued. One man, one broken gun against a squadron. He fired precisely 21 rounds. He chambered each one by hand. He never fixed the gun. He simply refused to let it be dead. Finally, the fuel gauges of the German fighters, or perhaps their shattered morale, dictated an end. The surviving FW-190s waggled their wings and broke contact, disappearing into the haze. An impossible silence, more shocking than the noise, fell over Wee Willie. She was still airborne. She was still theirs. The journey back was an epic in itself. On two engines, with a crippled control system, leaking fluids, and a cabin open to the wind, Lieutenant Campbell and co-pilot Vincent performed a feat of airmanship that defied every manual. Navigating by dead reckoning and sheer determination, they brought the shattered bomber across the channel. Knowing the landing gear was destroyed, Campbell aimed for the first friendly field he saw, a Royal Air Force fighter base in Manston, England. For over 40 minutes, this surreal duel continued. One man, one broken gun against a squadron. He fired precisely 21 rounds. He chambered each one by hand. He never fixed the gun. He simply refused to let it be dead. Finally, the fuel gauges of the German fighters, or perhaps their shattered morale, dictated an end. The surviving FW-190s waggled their wings and broke contact, disappearing into the haze. An impossible silence, more shocking than the noise, fell over Wee Willie. She was still airborne. She was still theirs. For his unimaginable courage, his refusal to surrender his post, and his sheer, stubborn will that changed the outcome of the battle, Staff Sergeant Archibald Archie Matthews was awarded the United States' highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor. The citation reads, in part, "With one gun completely useless and the other jammed, Sergeant Matthews, by his remarkable display of skill and determination, successfully repelled the attacks. His actions were responsible for the safe return of the aircraft and crew." The legacy of February 24, 1944, is not one of grand strategy or shifting front lines. It is a legacy etched in the microcosm of a single, battered aluminum turret. It is a testament to the human spirit's ability to find a way when there is none, to weaponize hope, and to prove that a tool is only as broken as the will of the man who uses it. Matthews did not turn the tide with a superior weapon. He turned it with a superior heart. The story of Archie Matthews and Wee Willie is one of countless untold chapters written in the skies and on the battlefields of the Second World War. Stories of impossible odds, quiet heroism, and moments where the course of events hinged on a single decision, a single shot, a single act of defiance. This was just one of those stories. Subscribe my YouTube channel and tap the notification bell as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.